afternoon and welcome to this Safer Dance seminar. My name's Fiona Becker and I'm a senior consultant with the NSPCC and a member of the Safer Dance working group. And I've got the pleasure today of introducing the session, which is all about DBS. And I think it will be a very useful session. We know there's a demand for this, so we're really looking forward to the session. Just before I get going, I just wanted to say that this session is being recorded, but we won't be recording the question and answer session at the end of the session. So it's just to let you know that, and we're recording it so that the information can go up on the website and be shared more widely with other people who weren't able to make it today. Cathy will also be presenting a series of PowerPoint slides and she will be making those available to those that attend today. So just before we get going, I wanted to just say a little bit about the Safer Dance working group. It was established now 2 years ago and it seems the time has flown, but it was a response to the issues that were raised in the Safer Dance in the dance teaching community in response to some high profile safeguarding cases, and a concern about trying to do things better as regards safeguarding amongst all genres of dance. So Peter Flew, who's our Associate Pro Vice Chancellor, who's the Associate Pro Vice Chancellor, Dean of the School of Education at Roehampton University, together with a group of dance and safeguarding professionals, came together to establish this working group with the ambition of supporting dance teaching professionals to address long-standing and possibly hidden safeguarding concerns. We really wanted to raise the awareness at all levels and across all different participants in the dance world, including parents and carers, children, dance teachers, and membership organisations, as well as in schools and with individual teachers. And to that end, we've focused our work so far on probably 4 key areas. First of all, we've sought to bring together a diverse range of people with dance experience, but also safeguarding professionals, dance association representatives, researchers, the police, etc., to share experience and expertise within the work that we're trying to achieve. We've also developed dance-specific resources to make safeguarding much more bespoke to the sector. So, for example, we've done a paper on what good practice looks like in a dance sector. We've provided guidance on the adapted position of trust legislation, which now includes those in the dance sector. We've provided guidance for mainstream schools on recruiting dance teachers. And also posters indicating a dance school is making a pledge to keep its students safe. We've also sought to influence, and Peter Flew has been sitting on a working group for updating the government's out of school settings guidance, whilst another of our committee has been involved in bringing the CEOs together from various associations and membership organisations, and also seeking to work with those that arrange competitions and events for dance. And finally, and what we're doing today is run some webinars to share information, expertise, and discuss safeguarding issues. And this one is the 4th one. If you're interested in previous ones, they are up on our website. And the last one we did was about safeguarding, HR safeguarding, as an overview. What are the principles of safer recruitment and vetting? So if you haven't seen that one, that might be a useful one to catch up on. And out of that, we knew that people wanted something much more detailed about the DBS system, as there are some confusions and people not being sure, you know, what to do and who should be checked. And we really felt that it was best to go straight to the DBS and ask for some help on this. So I'm delighted today to introduce Catherine Taylor, who's with us today from the DBS to help talk through this really important issue. Now, Cathy is the Regional Outreach Manager at the DBS. She's part of the partnerships team and manages the team of regional outreach advisors who support organisations across England, Wales and Northern Ireland with DBS processes and legislation. She also supports partnerships with national organisations across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And prior to that, she has extensive experience in the voluntary sector, supporting workforce development, developing and delivering training to the children's workforce, supporting families with preschool children and children who've been impacted by domestic violence. She's been a children's centre manager and has been a member of a local Safeguarding Children's Board's training team. And probably importantly for everybody, she's been a keen dance student from the age of 3 to 18, and she still enjoys adult dance class now. So she's got that first-hand knowledge of what the dance sector is like, having been an experienced student in it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Cathy. And just to say, please do put questions or comments in the chat box. And what we will do is at the end of the session, about 2:15, we will pick up on those questions, but we won't answer them as we go through the session, because it may well be that the session actually answers your questions subsequently. So I hope that's okay. And unless anyone's got a comment or a question, we're going to make a start. So over to you, Cathy.
Okay, thank you very much, Fiona, for that kind introduction. I'm just going to share my screen with you now, so you will be able to see the PowerPoint presentation I'm going to give to you today. Okay. Yeah, brilliant. Hopefully you can all see that now. Okay. Move over to the next slide. So yeah, just a few housekeeping issues. I know Fiona's covered some of these already. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat box and we will aim to answer those at the end. If we don't get a chance to answer your question, or if I need to go away and get some more information, I'll make sure they are circulated. Confidentiality, obviously today we shouldn't really be talking about things that are confidential to your organisation, but please be mindful of confidentiality. If you want to share a situation, please make sure that it is anonymised so we wouldn't be able to identify anyone in it. If you can all keep microphones off unless you're speaking, just so we don't have any background noise. Captions, if you click on the More tab on the bottom of your screen, you should be able to pull up some captions. I'll always say I do have a Scouse accent, and it's quite funny because sometimes the captions don't actually understand me. So it's always quite hit and miss what those captions are going to tell you. And like Fiona said, you will get a copy of the slides after the presentation, so you don't need to worry about furiously scribbling notes or drawing pictures. Okay, so our objectives for today are to look at what the benefits of DBS and yourselves working together. We're going to look at the different levels of DBS checks that are available, and then we're going to be looking at how you can decide when an individual is eligible for a check and at what level. We're going to look at what regulated activity is, and that's really important because that really affects the level of check that you can ask for in terms of working with children and adults. Just going to briefly mention the DBS update service, and hopefully by the end of the day you'll have an understanding of what safe recruitment practices can be in place that DBS checks can form a part of. Okay, so just give you a little bit of introduction about the DBS. So we have a 5-year strategy, which we are currently halfway through. So we're doing a bit of a refresh of the strategy at the moment, where it focuses on 3 key elements for our business, and that's our profile, our people and quality. We detail a number of actions that are going to be taken over the next 5 years. And our work provides significant protection to the public, and the delivery of this strategy will enable us to develop as an organisation, improve the services that we provide for yourselves, and support the contribution we make within the safeguarding community. So our purpose is to protect the public by helping employers make safer recruitment decisions and by barring individuals who pose a risk to vulnerable groups from working in certain roles. So when I say employers or employees, I'm also talking about those people who are volunteers or have volunteers within their organisations. So for say employer or employee, it's a catch-all for everyone I'm talking about. If you would like to, you'll see throughout the slides that are hyperlinks, and if you'd like to have a look at our current business plan, you're more than welcome to click onto that hyperlink. So what is the role of DBS? And this is a question that I am asked a lot of the time. So the DBS is responsible for the delivery of disclosure and barring functions on behalf of the government. So a lot of you will be aware of the disclosure functions, and those are the criminal record check certificates that we produce for England, Wales and the islands under Part 5 of the Police Act. But one of the things that people don't realise we also do is we operate the barring functions for England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And those barring functions are those two lists where if you're working with adults or children in regulated activity, you could be placed on one of these lists when we determine that you are not suitable or you are a future risk to work with children and or adults in regulated activity. And I do have a workshop coming up in November about the legal duty to refer, so I'd really recommend that you attend that so you can find out a little bit more about the barring side of a DBS. So today we are going to be focusing on those disclosure functions. So as you can see, we've got legislation there on the screen, and that legislation underpins everything we do. We have different pieces of legislation which govern our disclosure and our barring functions. We do understand that it's really complex, and we're not expecting you to go through and read Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Act or the Rehabilitation of Offenders Exceptions Order Act. So that's why we've got myself and my team that are here to provide you with information, advice and guidance. And we've also got lots of leaflets and guidance on our DBS website as well. So as you can see, we only cover England, Wales and the islands for disclosure. So in Northern Ireland, disclosure functions are managed by Access NI, and in Scotland, they are managed by Disclosure Scotland. And in Scotland, barring functions are also managed by Disclosure Scotland. But the Police National Computer covers the whole of England and Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland. So regardless of where you live in the UK and where you obtained your certificate from, it will still contain that same police information. Okay. So now I'm just going to move on and start off with a bit of a quiz to help you understand a little bit more about DBS and the disclosure part of DBS. So I'm going to put a statement on the screen, and what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pop in the chat box whether you think that this statement is true or false, and Erin will give me a bit of feedback of what you are saying in the chat box. So our first statement is, I should always apply for the highest level of DBS check when I'm recruiting for any role. So do you think that this statement is true or false? And if you can pop your answers in the chat box, that'd be great. Oh, I can see answers flying in there. I can see the numbers of chat going up. That's great.
So definitely sounds like false.
Yes, so this one is definitely false. So well done, everyone. So the level of DBS check that can be applied for is set out in legislation, and it depends on a number of factors, including what the person's job or volunteering role is responsible for doing, what activities they will be doing in that role, who the person will be working with, and does this include performing activities with children or adults that could be considered vulnerable, where is the person carrying out their job role, because the level of check someone is eligible for could differ if they're working in certain places such as a school or a care home. Also, when we're working with children, supervision comes into deciding on level of checks. And also when working with children in terms of regulated activity, or adults in terms of what level of check you can apply for. It also depends on how many times that you're doing those things in your role. So these are all legal requirements that need to be considered when you're looking at what is the highest level of DBS check you can apply for. Question 2. Anyone who works around children or vulnerable adults is eligible for a standard or an enhanced level DBS check. Do you think this one is true or false? Okay.
It looks like the majority of answers are true.
So this one is actually false. So working around children or vulnerable adults may require you to have additional safeguarding measures in place, but it doesn't automatically mean an employee will be eligible for a standard or an enhanced DBS check. The legal requirements for these checks must still be met regarding what activities they're doing, where they're doing them, and how often. So again, we'll go through all the different levels of checks and how to determine what level of check you can apply for a little bit later on. The job I'm recruiting for does not work with children or vulnerable adults, so I can't apply for any DBS check.
It looks like most of the answers are false.
Yeah, this one is false. So although there are legal requirements that must be met for an individual to be eligible for a standard or enhanced DBS check, an employer can ask for a basic check for anyone they are recruiting, regardless of what their role will be and what activities they will be carrying out. A basic check will show details of any unspent convictions and conditional cautions. A DBS certificate has come back without any information on it. This means the DBS have said it's okay to employ this individual. I think that's true or it's false.
So we've got the majority of these answers saying false.
Yeah. So a DBS check with no police information on does let you know that as an employer, that an individual doesn't have any conviction history subject to filtering, and I will explain what filtering means later on, or any information about them that the police believe is relevant and should be disclosed. But this shouldn't be seen that DBS is stating that this person is suitable to employ. The DBS supplies information for employers to consider as part of their decision-making process, and it should be used as part of your wider safer recruitment practices, not seen as a pass or a fail. The DBS will tell me if an employee has any new convictions after the DBS certificate has been issued. True or false?
I think we've got general agreement here that this is false.
Yes, so this is false. A DBS certificate is only able to provide information about an individual's conviction history up to the point at which the certificate was issued. If an individual receives a conviction after this date, the DBS will not be able to contact employers to tell them this information. However, DBS certificates can be registered for the update service. Certificates that are registered with the service will be kept up to date, as the DBS will perform regular checks to see if the information held on the certificate is still valid, or if there's any conviction information since the certificate was issued. So new conviction information is checked for weekly. Checks against the barred list is carried out weekly, and checks for new police intelligence are carried out every 9 months for certificates on the update service. Employers are able to perform status checks on all certificates registered to the update service that'll tell them whether the information on the certificate is still current or if they need to request a new DBS certificate. So this isn't a push notification service, and you can only check status with an individual's consent. An individual could have police information on their certificate, even if they've never had a conviction for an offence. I think that is true or false.
I think we've got some disagreement here. Some trues, some falses. Looks like the majority actually say true.
So this one is true. For enhanced DBS checks, the police will provide any information relating to any spent or unspent convictions, cautions, reprimands or warnings that are not filtered off the certificate. But enhanced DBS checks also provide any relevant police intelligence. And this is information that a chief police officer reasonably believes ought to be disclosed if it's relevant to the workforce or the role being applied for. So this could include incidents, for example, of reported violence where there's not been a conviction, or intelligence related to a number of allegations about an individual. My new employer can't accept my current DBS certificate because it has my previous employer's name on it.
The majority of answers here are false.
Yes, so this one is false. So DBS certificates are specific to the individual, and in most cases the workforce applied for. They're not tied to a particular employer who has submitted the application for a DBS check. This means that if an individual has a certificate from a previous job or volunteering role, and they're applying for a similar role that requires a DBS check of the same level in the same workforce, the employer can choose to accept this certificate rather than applying and waiting for a new one. And this is at the discretion of each individual employer. Where a workforce is stated as other, the certificate is only relevant to the role which has been applied for example, taxi driver. So with this one, you should always check, well, this is your own decision, but you need to check what your regulator states as well, because some regulatory bodies will state certificates aren't portable, but there's nothing in DBS legislation that says you can't move a certificate. A DBS check is not a legal requirement. True or false?
Looks like the majority of these answers are false.
So a DBS check is not a legal requirement, is actually true. So the DBS can't mandate which checks are required for certain positions or job roles, and there's not a legal requirement from the DBS to apply for a check. However, there are certain things that must always be considered. If you're an employer, you should consider whether there are any regulatory requirements for DBS checks to be carried out for certain positions. For example, Ofsted or the CQC may state it's a requirement that enhanced checks are applied for an employee doing a certain job. It's also important to consider that if you are employing someone to work in regulated activity with children and/or adults, there could be potential legal repercussions for employing someone who's legally barred from working with children or adults, where you have a reasonable expectation to know whether the person is barred or not. So for individuals who are in regulated activity, it's always best practice to apply for enhanced check with a check of the child or adult's barred list. And our final question today is, DBS certificates do not have an expiry date. Is that true or false?
The majority of these answers say false.
So this one is true. DBS certificates don't have expiry dates under DBS legislation, and we don't set a time limit for how long each certificate can be used for. I think that really surprises people. And I think that's probably people think there's a 3-year limit, because a lot of local authorities and regulators will state that DBS checks need to be renewed every 3 years, but this is something that it would be linked to your own policies and procedures. However, you've got to remember, since DBS certificates only provide conviction history, barred list status and police intelligence up until the date that the certificate was printed, it's always good practice to consider how often you're going to request that people renew their DBS certificates if they are not on the update service. So that allows you to make an informed and up-to-date suitability decision with the most recent conviction information available. Okay, well, I hope you found that useful. And just want to now give you some statistics about the DBS. So last financial year, we produced 4.4 million standard and enhanced disclosures. And we found that 91% of those were enhanced checks and around 35% were for volunteer positions. We did 2.6 million basic disclosures in the last financial year, and we found that that's shot right up since the beginning of COVID, and that tends to be linked to the sort of gig economy. So during COVID, there was lots more roles that were linked to things like Amazon, Deliveroo, Uber and Eats and things like that, and they're the type of roles that tend to request basic disclosures. We have 2 million people currently updated to the update service, and we have 88.7 thousand individuals that are barred from working with children and/or adults. So now I'm going to move on to look at what are the 4 levels of DBS check, and then we will look at who is eligible for these different levels of checks. So as you can see, there are 4 DBS checks. The first one is a basic check, and that is £18. So everybody has to pay for a basic DBS check, whether you are an employee or a volunteer. And that will show you unspent convictions and conditional cautions. There is no legislation around a basic check, so anybody can be asked to apply for a basic check, and you can actually apply for your basic checks yourself via the DBS website. I had to do it when I started my job here, and it was really easy to do. It actually, my mobile phone scanned my passport. It was really, really great. So anyone can apply for a basic check. Then we have our standard and enhanced checks. So standard and enhanced checks, there is a charge if you are an employee, but if you are a volunteer, these checks are free at the DBS level. If you're applying through a registered body or an umbrella body, they may charge you an admin fee to administer your checks. So if you're a volunteer, you may only have to pay the admin fee. If you are an employee, there will be the DBS charge, but also an admin fee on top of that for the organisation to process it for you. So we have standard DBS checks, and they will show you spent and unspent convictions and cautions subject to filtering. So eligibility for standard checks is set out in the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act Exceptions Order. And in this order, there is a list of roles that can apply for a standard level of check. Tends to be for roles when they are entering certain professions and their regulatory body will ask for them, such as accountants or solicitors. There are roles where people are working in fostering and adoption administration roles, where they have access to children's details, but they don't actually work with the children directly. They're named in the exceptions order. Also, if you are working in the healthcare world, you have access to patients, but you're not actually carrying out healthcare. So, for example, doctors, receptionists, they are eligible for a standard check. And also, what I always think is funny that it is named in legislation is if you are a football steward, you are eligible for a standard check, but no other sporting stewards are named in the legislation. If you want to have a look and find out who's eligible for a standard check, I'd say go on our website and look at the standard guidance. You'll find that for most roles that you're going to be working with, they're not going to be eligible for a standard check. The next level of check we have is an enhanced DBS check, and that has the same information on as a standard check, but it will also contain that relevant police intelligence. So that is the information that a chief police officer reasonably believes ought to be disclosed because of the role or the workforce being applied for. The 52 police and law enforcement agencies across the UK have to follow what we call a quality assurance framework, where they look at in detail about why this information should be disclosed on your DBS check, and they all have to follow that in the same way. So the eligibility for the enhanced checks is set out in the Police Act regulations. And the next level of check we have is the enhanced with barred list check. And this will show you the same information that you have on your enhanced check, but because the person is looking to work in regulated activity with children and or adults, it will also contain a check of the child or the adult's barred list. So there are 4 different levels of checks. So for your standard and enhanced checks, I mentioned there was filtering rules, and I'll explain what filtering rules are because it doesn't sound particularly obvious at first glance. So under the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act 1974, many convictions or cautions will become spent after a specified length of time, and this is known as the rehabilitation period. And this means that once the rehabilitation period has been completed, they won't show on a basic check, and you don't need to tell anyone about a spent conviction unless you're applying for a job where a standard or enhanced DBS check is needed. So you can find guidance about when to tell someone about criminal records on the DBS website. Also, you can also have a look at the charities of NACRO and Unlock, because they give lots of information for both employers and members of the public about spent and unspent convictions. So pre-2013, on standard and enhanced checks, all convictions and cautions were disclosed on a DBS certificate. In 2013, the Supreme Court ruled that disclosing all spent and unspent convictions was in a breach of the European Convention on Human Rights. Therefore, we were told to implement what we call a filtering regime. And this is when certain convictions or cautions will be taken off your DBS certificate in the criminal records part. So we call this filtering. So the current rules are all convictions are considered individually, and a conviction will be filtered from a criminal record certificate only if 11 years have elapsed since the date of the conviction, 5.5 years if the person was under 18 when convicted, it didn't result in a custodial or a suspended sentence, and it's not on the DBS list of specified offences that will never be filtered. So on our website, there is a list of serious offences, such as sexual or violent ones, that will never be taken off the DBS certificate. So if you want to have a look, you can have a look at them. In terms of cautions, reprimands and final warnings, a caution for an adult will be filtered after 6 years have elapsed since the date of caution, and only again if it doesn't appear on one of those specified offences. Youth cautions are not disclosed on DBS certificates, and childhood reprimands and warnings will not automatically be disclosed. So on your enhanced certificates, remember we do have that police intelligence part. So the police will still have the power to disclose any of those convictions or cautions that we have removed due to filtering if they believe it's relevant and it ought to be disclosed. So there's about over 4 million people in the UK with a criminal record. So does that mean that a person who might have information on their DBS certificate is not suitable to employ or have as a volunteer? And the answer to that is no. So we always say you need to be really, really careful how you respond to disclosure information. So you should have a policy where you set out how you will respond when someone either self-declares criminal records or there's information on a DBS certificate. So we'd always advise you to do a thorough risk assessment when there is content on a DBS check or if someone discloses a criminal record to yourselves. The first thing we'd always say as part of your risk assessment is the role a regulated activity role? And has the DBS check come back that they're barred from that workforce? If the answer is yes, at that point, you can't have that person employed or volunteering in regulated activity with the relevant workforce because it's actually illegal for yourselves to allow this to happen. And you could be taken to court and you can be fined or imprisoned. It's actually also illegal for the person who is offering to work, seeking to work, trying to work or working in regulated activity if they are barred from the relevant workforce. So if that information comes back on a DBS check, you would be need to inform the police that this has happened. You need to then think of, are there any other legal or regulatory requirements in response to that disclosure information? So you will find that some regulatory bodies might specify that if a person has committed a certain act, that they are not suitable to employ in a certain role. You also need to think about how serious was the offence. Do you understand what the offence was? How old was the person when they committed the offence, and how long ago was it? Is there a pattern of any offending behaviour? And does that offending behaviour pattern raise a concern with yourselves? So what were the circumstances surrounding that offending behaviour? Was a person in extreme hardship? Was mental health a factor? Was substance misuse a factor? Was child exploitation a factor? These are the things you need to think about. And then, is there any evidence of rehabilitation? So is there evidence that a person's changed their ways? Is there evidence of rehabilitation such as substance misuse counselling? Has there been any recent offending, or have they got references to demonstrate a change in behaviour? So these are things that you need to think about as an organisation or as an employer in terms of when you are taking people on and they have information on their DBS check. So earlier on in the quiz, I mentioned our update service. So the update service is available to anyone who's applying for a standard or enhanced DBS check. There is an annual subscription fee, which is currently £13, but again, this is free for volunteers, and you can hold more than one certificate on the update service. So for example, if you had different levels of checks with different workforces, all those certificates can be held under the one subscription. Individuals must subscribe to the update service at the time they're applying for their DBS check or within 28 days of receiving their certificate. So the update service will check for updates against Police National Computer Information weekly, Barred Lists weekly, and Police Intelligence every 9 months. So if you are an organisation or employer, you can check online free of charge with an individual's consent if their certificate is on the update service. So you must see a copy of that original certificate, and also the certificate must be at the level that you're able to check for and for the correct workforce. So if you've got consent to check the update service, you will either be told no new information exists, or if the original certificate contained no relevant information. And if that's the case and you are happy with the information on the certificate, you would not need to request a new DBS check. You might be told new information exists, and at that point you'd want to do a new DBS certificate to find out what that new information is and to see whether that would affect your suitability decision, because the update service won't go into any detail about what that new information is. Or you might be told there's no record of the certificate in the service, and if that's the case, you'd want to do a new DBS check to make sure that there's no new information that you need to consider. So the benefits both to yourself and to individuals when you sign up for the update service. So the benefit is you can recheck whenever you want to with the individual's consent. It gives you fast results, so you will know instantly if there's no change or you need a new certificate. So that helps with your onboarding processes of bringing new people online. Also, for example, if you are looking to bring in temporary or supply teachers on a really quick basis, if they're on the update service, you'll know straight away whether you'd need a new DBS check. And also it can work out more cost effective if you're paying £13 a year or free for volunteers, rather than having to do a new check every 3 years. So now we're going to move on to how do you decide what level of DBS check you are able to request for an individual's role. So there's 5 steps that you need to follow when you're looking at what level of check you can request. So the first thing to think about is, who is the organisation providing services for? Is it children? Is it adults? Is it both? Or is it another named role, such as taxi drivers? What does the role involve? So what type of activities are being undertaken as part of the role? Or is it a role that's named in legislation, such as teaching, training, or providing healthcare? How often is the role performed? And when we talk about regulated activity with children, you'll see that how often some roles are performed affect the level of DBS check you can ask for. You also need to consider, when you're looking at working with children, is the work supervised or not? Because again, that will affect the level of DBS check you're able to ask for. And you also need to think about, where is the role performed? So is it a place specified in legislation, which means those who work there are in regulated activity? So for example, schools, children's homes, or children's hospitals in Wales. So we do have different eligibility guidance, which is available on our website. We have a number of leaflets that talk about regulated activity with children and regulated activity with adults. And we also have sector-specific guidance, for example, children and sport would be a useful one for yourselves. So for the enhanced DBS certificates, where we disclose police information, we split up workforces into 3 different workforces. Any work with children is called the child workforce. Any work with adults is called the adult workforce. And then anything else that doesn't neatly fit into working with children or working with adults is called the other workforce. And that is, for example, your taxi drivers, security licensing, all will fall into the other workforce. But you will be concentrating on the child workforce and the adult workforce for your DBS checks. So for DBS purposes, a child is a person who's not yet reached the age of 18. So anyone aged 0 to 17 is regarded as a child for DBS legislation. So if we're going to think about when you can request the highest level of DBS check, and that is with children. We are looking at regulated activity, so an enhanced with children's barred list check. We need to think about what the role is doing, how often is it doing, and is it supervised. So if a role is providing healthcare or personal care, this only needs to be done once for it to become regulated activity and eligible for that enhanced with barred list check. So the definition of providing healthcare is healthcare provided by a healthcare professional or someone acting under their direct supervision. Then we have personal care, which is where help is provided with eating or drinking because the child is ill or has a disability, or where help is provided with toileting, washing and dressing because of a child's age, illness or disability. Next, we have unsupervised teaching, training and instruction, and unsupervised caring for or supervising of children. So this must be done more than 3 days in a 30-day period, or once overnight with the opportunity for contact between 2 AM and 6 AM for this to become regulated activity. If it is done less often, it is eligible for an enhanced DBS check, but if it's done more than 3 days in a 30-day period, or once overnight with the opportunity for contact between 2 AM and 6 AM, that falls in regulated activity with children, so it is enhanced with children's barred list check. So we've got the words unsupervised there. So I'll just briefly touch on what we mean in terms of supervision. So it is up to an organisation to determine whether they think a role is sufficiently supervised. There is some guidance on the Department for Education's website about what they think is sufficient supervision. But when we talk about supervision, we're not talking about parents, for example, supervising a class. The supervision must be done by an individual within your organisation who has that correct level of check. Okay. So when we talk about providing advice or guidance on physical, emotional or educational well-being, again, this must be done more than 3 days in a 30-day period, or once overnight for it to become eligible for the enhanced with children's barred list check. If it's done less often, it's eligible for an enhanced check. Then we have driving children under an arrangement. And when I talk about driving children under arrangement, this has to be part of someone's job or volunteering role. And that must be done more than 3 days in a 30-day period to be eligible for the enhanced with children's barred list check. If it's done less often, it is eligible for an enhanced check. Then we have moderating a web-based service. And I always think this just doesn't make sense, because what is a web-based service? So a web-based service is anything online which is wholly or mainly for children, and the person moderating it has the opportunity to access and change content and to interact with the users. So this could be a Facebook site or an Instagram site that is wholly or mainly for the people within your dance school. So your children within your dance school. It wouldn't be a website that is for the general public as a whole. So it might be a closed exam group, for example, where parents are not going to be getting involved, but the person has the opportunity to contact and speak to the children directly. So with that web-based service, they need to be doing that more than 3 days in a 30-day period for that to become regulated activity with children. If they're doing it less often, it is eligible for an enhanced check. If you're registered to be a childminder or a foster carer, that's in legislation that you are in regulated activity. And now, if you are a day-to-day manager of staff in regulated activity, even if you're not doing the regulated activity, you will be eligible for that enhanced with child barred list check. So, as well as thinking about these things, which we look at as work with children, we need to think about where does the activity take place. So, if the activity takes place in a school, a nursery, a children's home, a children's centre, a childcare premises, a children's hospitals in Wales, or a detention centre for children. It doesn't matter what the role is doing, so it doesn't need to be doing any of the activities listed on the previous slide if the role is taking place in any of these establishments and it meets the criteria of working there more than 3 days in a 30-day period or overnight between 2 AM and 6 AM. I have the opportunity for contact with children in the establishment and work there for the purpose of the establishment, and it's not a temporary, occasional or supervised volunteer role. They would be considered to be in regulated activity. So an example of this could be a school caretaker. So our school caretaker is full-time and he does not do any of the jobs listed on the previous slide. So because the school caretaker is working there more than 3 days in a 30-day period, you would imagine they have the opportunity for contact with their children as they're going around doing their jobs, and they are working there for the purpose of the establishment, and it's not a temporary or occasional or supervised volunteer role. At that point, they go into regulated activity, so are eligible for an Enhanced with Children's Barred List check. So that is what we need to look at when we are thinking, are people eligible for the Enhanced with Children's Barred List check? But there is other work with children which isn't deemed to be regulated activity, but is eligible for DBS checks. So, as I mentioned earlier, that's supervised teaching, training, instruction, caring for or supervising of children is eligible for an enhanced DBS check. Supervised volunteers in a school or other specified establishments are eligible for an enhanced check. Those that are living or working in childminding or childcare premises are eligible for an enhanced check with a check of the Children's Barred List. Anyone who's carrying out any of those regulated activities, so that anything that was on that list on the previous slide, but they're not doing it often enough, are eligible for an enhanced DBS check. Anyone who's a trustee of a children's charity. So a trustee of a children's charity, we're talking about a charity that in their information and constitution is listed as a children's charity. They're eligible for enhanced DBS check. And if you're registering to be an adoptive parent, you're eligible for enhanced DBS check with a check of the Children's Barred List. Okay, now we'll go on to work with adults now. So working with adults for DBS purposes, an adult is a person who's aged 18 or over. And as you can see, regulated activity with adults is a lot simpler because it only needs to be done once for it to become regulated activity. Excuse me. So as you can see on that list there, we have providing healthcare, which is the same definition as it is for children, providing personal care, and that is a slightly different definition as it is with children because it's about supporting or prompting someone with washing, eating, drinking, dressing, taking medication, care of hair, skin, or nails for health reasons only because of a person's age, illness, or disability. Social work, which is provided by a social care worker, assistance for the day-to-day financial running of an adult's own household, assistance for the conduct of an adult's affairs and conveying an adult. So those activities only need to be done once with adults to become regulated activity and eligible for that enhanced with adults barred list check. And then we get work with adults, which isn't regulated activity, but is eligible for a DBS check. And this gets a little bit more complicated. So I'll go through this with yourselves now. So first of all, to decide whether an adult whether a role is eligible for a check within the adult workforce, so an enhanced level check, you need to follow these 3 steps. So the first thing you must establish is the person aged 18 or over, and are they receiving a listed health or social care service or receiving a listed activity set out in legislation. So a lot of people will say that they're working with vulnerable adults or adults at risk, so therefore they must be eligible for a DBS check. The term vulnerability and at risk is a very subjective term because we can all be vulnerable or at risk at certain times in our lives. And what I may determine to be vulnerable or at risk, another person might not. So what we say is you need to establish whether a person is receiving a listed health or social care service or a listed activity set out in legislation. And you can find out what those are on our DBS website, on our Working with Adults leaflets in the Annex 1. So it tends to be things like a person's living in residential accommodation for care or nursing, someone's in sheltered housing, someone who needs support, care or assistance to develop capacity to live independently, being provided with care or assistance because of their age, illness or disability in the place that they live, anyone detained in prison, remand centres or removal centres, anyone on probation, or if you've set up a group because of a person's age, illness or disability, and that group is targeted at those people rather than the general public, they will fall into step 1. Next thing you need to look at is what is the role doing? So they must be doing one of the activities or more. So training, teaching, instructing, providing assistance, advice or guidance, caring for, supervising, providing treatment or therapy, moderating a public interactive electronic communication service, working in a care home or driving adults under contract arrangements. And then the third step to look at is, are they carrying out the work often enough? So are they doing the work more than 3 days in any period of 30 or any time between 2 AM and 6 AM or once a week on an ongoing basis? So to be eligible for an enhanced check in the adult workforce, you need to be able to say yes to all these 3 steps. If you can't say yes to all of the 3 steps, you would only be able to apply for a basic check. So again, there is some work with adults that is eligible for DBS checks, but it's not included in those rules. So if you are a trustee of an adults charity, so if your charity is carrying out regulated activity or work with adults that's eligible for an enhanced check, you are eligible for an enhanced check. Then we have certain positions in England and Wales, which is set out in legislation that are eligible for DBS checks. And anyone who's managing anyone who carries out work with adult activities is eligible for the same level of check. And here again, just a little bit of a hyperlink there, which will link you to our adult workforce guide on the DBS website. So one of the questions that we ask quite a lot is, can we carry out DBS checks on students that are supporting us? So anyone aged 16 and above can be asked to apply for a DBS check. You would need to apply those previous mentioned criteria for deciding what level of check that person is eligible for. If you've got mixed age ranges in a class, so participants who are aged over 16 are not eligible for a DBS check because they wouldn't be carrying out any of those activities such as teaching, training and supervising, because they're just participating in a class. You will find, obviously, you might have a class with 16 to 18-year-olds in. Then thinking about 16 and 17-year-olds who are part of dance companies or they're actually employed. So when someone is 16 or 17, teaching, training, instruction, caring for or supervising a child whose age is 16 or 17 in relation to their employment, providing a child who is 16 or 17 with advice or guidance on their emotional, educational or physical well-being in relation to their employment. This point, it becomes not regulated activity. So those who are teaching, training, instructing, caring for or supervising 16 and 17-year-olds or providing a child 16, 17 with advice or guidance on their emotional, educational, physical well-being in relation to their employment, they're not eligible for DBS checks. So if you have a 16 or 17-year-old as part of your dance company or in your employment, because of their age of being 16 or 17 and it's in relation to employment, you're not eligible for those DBS checks. Checks on overseas dance teachers, again, We do know that dance schools will often have visiting people from overseas who are carrying out masterclasses or dance sessions. I know myself, one of my friend's children, she goes to a dance club, and it's always regularly advertised that they've got people coming in from America to teach like the latest street dance and things. So when we look at overseas teachers, anyone with a UK address can be asked to apply for a DBS check. But obviously you have got people that are going to not be in the UK. So if you've got someone who's overseas, or even have spent any time overseas, you can ask for an overseas check. So this isn't done by the DBS. So you need to have a look at the gov.uk website about how to apply for criminal records for people who either have lived overseas or are from overseas. Every country has a slightly different way of applying for it, so you need to look into details about that. So the NSPCC does recommend that if a candidate has been a resident of overseas for 3 months or more in the past 5 years, you should check the candidate's criminal record from that country. So again, that's where you would find that information. Any documents that you see in English should be any documents that aren't in English should be accompanied with a certified translation. And you need to think of, if you can't obtain overseas checks for candidates, you need to carry out a risk assessment to help you make an informed decision about how you're best going to proceed. So now we're just going to think about applying some of this learning for our last sort of part of the session. So I'm going to give you some scenarios, and I would like you to pop in the chat box what level of check do you think that this person would be eligible for. So the first role we've got is a dance teacher, and this dance teacher is employed by a dance school. They've been recruited to teach a regular class, so they're doing it 3 times a week, and it's for children aged 4 to 18. They will be unsupervised, and they're paid by the hour on a freelance basis. What level of check do you think that this dance teacher would be eligible for? If you want to pop that in the chat box, and Erin will come back to me. So I think, would it be basic? Would it be enhanced? Would it be enhanced with barred list? You see the chat box hanging away there.
It's looking like everybody is saying enhanced with barred list, with children's barred list specifically.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's think about how we've worked out this level of DBS check. So the first thing we're going to look at is which workforce are they going to be working with? Then we're going to be thinking about, are they doing an activity that's listed as a regulated activity? So we know they're going to be working in the child workforce. They are going to be doing one of those activities that's listed as a regulated activity because they're teaching a class and they're doing it. Then we need to go, are they doing it often enough? So if they're doing it 3 times a week, yeah. Are they supervised? No. So we go, yes, they're doing it often enough. They're not supervised. That tells us they're eligible for the enhanced with children's barred list check. So well done, everyone. Next, we have a one-off masterclass teacher, workshop leader, and they are a performer with lots of West End and other performance credits offering the masterclass. They've booked to teach one-off masterclass as part of the summer school. There'll be 3 classes happening simultaneously, and the dance school owner or principal will rotate and pop into all 3 to see how things are going. So what level of DBS check do you think this masterclass teacher will be asked for or can be asked for? What are people thinking?
I think we've got a bit of disagreement in the chat here. So it looks like some people say enhanced and some people say basic.
Ah, well, let's work this one through. So the first question we need to ask is, which workforce will they be working with? And then we need to say, are they doing an activity that is listed as a regulated activity? So they're going to be working with the child workforce. Are they doing an activity that's listed as regulated? Yes. And that is because they are teaching. Oops. So are they doing it often enough? And the answer for this one is no, because they're only doing it as a one-off. Are they supervised? Well, we'd say in this case, really, they wouldn't be, because it's popping in and out sufficient supervision. So our main thing to look at is, yes, they're doing one of those regulated activities with children, but they're not doing it often enough. So that takes them out of regulated activity. So they would be eligible for an enhanced DBS check. Okay, our next one, we have a volunteer teaching assistant aged 17. They're enthusiastic and very capable current student. They've expressed an interest in teaching and now arriving early and helping the teacher with classes for the younger students, and they're not being paid. What level of check do you think this person is eligible for? I can see people are thinking because the chat's slowing down.
So we've got a mix of answers again. It looks like basic, enhanced, and standard.
Okay, let's work through this one and see where we get to. So which workforce will they be working with? And are they doing an activity that's listed as regulated activity? So they're working with the child workforce because they are arriving early and helping teach the younger students. So if the person's 17, they're going to be within the child workforce themselves. Are they doing an activity that's listed as a regulated activity? Well, if they're helping the teacher out by teaching, caring or supervising, they would be doing that regulated activity. So are they doing it often enough? Well, we presume they are, because, you know, we're presuming that it's a weekly dance class. So we'll say, yeah, they're going to be doing it often enough. And are they supervised? So in this case, we're not really sure. So this is going to affect what level of check that they're eligible to apply for. So if we say that they're being supervised, we would say, well, they're doing a regulated activity and they're doing it often enough. So if they're supervised, they can have an enhanced check. If they weren't being supervised, so say, for example, the dance teacher starts leaving the student to run classes by themselves, you'd say they're not supervised, so would be eligible for the enhanced with barred list check. So that would be that one. Now we have a parent helper. So a parent helper has volunteered to help out backstage with the annual show. They'll be supervising a group of children on their own, helping them make quick changes and making sure they're on stage on time. So have a little think about what level of check you think this parent would be eligible for. I'm now having flashbacks to quick changes. So what do you think?
So some people are saying enhanced or enhanced with barred. and one saying they're not eligible, but most saying enhanced.
Okay, so let's work this one through. So which workforce will they be working with? And are they doing an activity that's listed as a regulated activity? So they'll be with the child workforce, and are they doing an activity that's listed as a regulated activity? So yes, because they'll be supervising a group of children. And also, depending on the age of the child, they could be doing personal care by helping them get dressed and undressed. So are they doing it often enough? Well, they're not, are they? Because it says here that it's the annual show. So they're not going to be doing this more than 3 days in a 30-day period. And are they supervised? No. So with this one, we'd say they are doing one of those regulated activities, but they're not doing it often enough. So in this case, they're eligible for an enhanced. Now, if the parent helper was only in charge of their own child and no one else's children, that would make them not eligible for a DBS check, because you can't be in regulated activity with your own child. But if they're doing it with other children other than their own child, that would then push them into being eligible for a DBS check. Last minute cover. So an organisation as a regular booking delivering an after school club in a local primary school. At lunchtime, the teacher who usually delivers this calls in sick, and there's no one else within the organisation available to cover. So start reaching out on social media to see if there was any other freelancer who might be available. What level of check would you need to be asking for here? Or would you be eligible to be asking for, I should say? What are people thinking? Or are you all a bit stumped?
It looks like most people are saying enhanced, and some people saying enhanced with children barred.
Okay, so let's work this one through. So which workforce will they be working with? Are they doing an activity that's listed as regulated? So they're working with the child workforce, and yes, they're doing a listed regulated activity, and that is because they'll be teaching. So are they doing it often enough? Well, in this case, no. Are they supervised? No. Where are they doing it? So they're doing it in a school. So these are all the things that we need to consider before we make a decision about what level of check. So we need to start thinking about those specified establishment rules as well at this point. But they're eligible for an enhanced, and that is because at this point, again, they're not doing it often enough to meet those specified establishment rules that bring it into regulated activity. Okay, right, I really see we're near the end of time before questions, so I'll quickly whiz through this one with you. So we've got an administrator or a receptionist who assists with signing the students in and collecting payments from parents. Based in the main reception area, which is also the waiting area for parents, they might occasionally have to pop into the class to speak to the teacher, but it doesn't need any activity or look after any children or young people. So what level of check do you think for this role?
So we've got disagreement here as well. So lots of people were saying basic, and then a couple of people have also said enhanced or enhanced with barring because the building is regulated.
Okay, so when we think about buildings and specified establishments, they have to either be a school. And when we talk about a school, we're talking about not saying that somewhere is a dance school, but saying somewhere where pupils are going for their main education. So in this case, we wouldn't be saying that this would be a school. So we'll work through this one. So which workforce will they be working with? And are they doing an activity that's listed as regulated activity? So yeah, children's workforce, because they're obviously within a children's activity, but they're not doing anything that is none of those listed as regulated activity or working with children. So they'd only be eligible for a basic. So just flick through quickly before we go into questions. There's lots of resources available on the DBS website. So we do have different eligibility guidance. And we also have information about basic checks that can be found there. Some useful links for you there to have a look at. And also, if you would like to contact ourselves for any support, please do. We do have regional outreach workers who are based in each of the regions of England, Wales and Northern Ireland that can provide you with any support around anything to do with DBS processes and legislation. You can also contact me via the partnerships team or the outreach inbox. If you've got any questions about, for example, where a DBS certificate is up to, please contact customer services. We are on Facebook and we are on Twitter, so please give us a follow. And then hopefully that has been useful for you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back to any questions that people might have. So either if you want to pop them in the chat box or give me a shout. Erin, if we've got any questions that have come through.
There was one question earlier in the chat, which was about dance school. So the question was, for clarity and avoidance of doubt for this audience, does a dance school operating from a community center count as a school?
No. A school is set out in legislation as somewhere where someone is, so it is children or age 0 to 17 are receiving their main education. So we are talking about formal schools at this point rather than a dance school. I know it sounds confusing because a dance school is a dance school, but we've taken where they're having their education. So you could have some dance schools. Yeah, so a full-time vocational training school, yeah, that would fall under regulated activity. So that would fall under a specified establishment if it was a full-time vocational training school. So you tend to find those type of places are regulated by Ofsted and the Department for Education, as well as being a dance school. If you've got any other questions, anyone want to shout out or raise your hand?
I'm not seeing any hands raised among the attendees. Attendees can't shout out, but if you do raise your hand, I'd be happy to give you the opportunity to speak.
So I've just seen one flash up from Cameron. Could you clarify further on an employed 16-year-old? So I don't know whether Cameron, you want to speak what and sort of like clarify your question for me.
Cameron, you should be able to speak now.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just interested in the sort of the section on 16, 17-year-olds who are working in a professional company and just the sort of overlap really of them being both a vulnerable young person and also a working professional. If you could just sort of clarify the sort of approaches there, that'd be great.
Yeah, so in this case, the DBS check would be really much about in this that they wouldn't be considered to be a vulnerable child in this case because they're employed. So you would have to look at your own policies and procedures in terms of risk assessing and safeguarding them outside of the DBS sphere, because the person teaching, training and caring for them wouldn't fall into work with children in this case because it's linked to their employment.
Thank you.
Can I just ask Cathy, just going back to your previous point about what constitutes a school?
Yeah.
So if there was a scenario where a private dance school, for example, or a community dance activity was taking place in the evenings or at weekends, but they were hiring out a school hall effectively, where would that sit? I guess the activity would be considered out of school settings, but it's happening in a school building. So where would the line be there?
So you'd have to look at that specified establishment rules. So would they be having contact with the children? So obviously, first thing to look at is within your dance group, do they fall under DBS check because of the role that they're doing? So teaching, training, and then you'd look at your specified establishment rules. So you're probably going to have your teachers are going to fall under DBS regulations because of the role that they're doing wherever they're doing it. But you then look at, well, we might have someone, for example, a receptionist taking the money as people come in and out. So you have to then look at your specified establishment rules to see what level of check that they are. When you think about it, at the moment, if they are not acting for the purpose of that school, so that educational establishment, it wouldn't tie in to the specified establishment rules. So I think first thing to always look at is what's going on, and then where is it going on, and then focusing on those specified establishment rules.
That's great, thank you.
Sorry, I know that sounds quite complicated.
And there's also one other question in the chat from Jessica. So she says, to clarify, you can reach out to the DPS update service at any time for new information about a member of staff with their permission. But
Yeah, so
you will also be notified automatically if someone on your system has new info.
no, so it's not a push notification service. So if someone's on the update service with their permission, you can check whenever you want to check. We're finding taxi licensing authorities are doing checks every 6 months now with permission, but it's not a push notification service. So if someone does, in the meantime, have content on their certificate, we would not be able to notify you as an employer because we don't know that you're an employer. So we would say you just put it in your policies and procedures about how often you're going to check the update service.
Can I ask Cathy on that point then, how often would you say is best practice to be checking the update service? Because that's quite a tricky one to know. I know in the past people have used a 3-year rule, but 3 years is a long time. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice or if you know of up-to-date practice where people do it more often than that.
And this is purely down to an organisation, really. Like I say, taxi licensing, some are checking every 6 months now. Got to remember, yes, the barred list is checked for weekly, conviction history is checked for weekly, but it's only every 9 months that the police intelligence is checked for. So you could be checking for conviction history every week and there'd be no change in that, but in 9 months there might be police intelligence there. So it's got to think about yourselves, what's proportionate for your organisation. What some people, what I find some organisations do is they say, right, if you've not worked for us for 3 months and you're on the update service, we'll recheck when you come back into our employment. So say you've got people that are working on a supply basis with you, that is something that they're tending to do. Like you find schools that are employing peripatetic teachers that are coming in once a term, they'll check every term because they're only seeing them once a term. So it's very much up to your organisation what you think's proportionate for yourselves.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
Laura's got her hand up.
Oh, thank you. Could I just ask about, as an employer, obviously we would check the original certificate, but could you clarify about whether it's appropriate to hold a copy of that certificate or an image? I've heard conflicting things there and seeing conflicting practices. So yeah, clarification would be great. Thank you.
So a CBS certificate belongs to the individual, not an organisation. So under GDPR rules, you shouldn't be keeping copies of people's certificates. You can keep copies of the date it was done, the number of the certificate, the workforce, And if there was content on the certificate, you might link that to a risk assessment, but we would say you shouldn't keep a copy of the original certificate because it is not your information to hold.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
All right.
Now, I know we're sort of reaching nearly 2:30, and I wondered, Cathy, we've got another webinar that you're leading on the 8th of November, and I don't know if people have signed up for that already, but certainly they can do. I wonder if you could just outline what you'll be covering in that workshop so people understand the difference, really, because it's not a repeat of this one.
No, so we'll be covering the legal duty to refer. So some organisations and employers have what we call the legal duty to refer under the Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Act. So if you have anybody either employed or volunteering with you that carries out that regulated activity with children or vulnerable or adults, so in your cases it'll be children, you have a legal duty to make a referral to the DBS if someone leaves your employment due to safeguarding reasons. So we will be really clearly talking about what is your legal duty to refer, but also how to make a referral to us at the DBS, and also how to make a good quality referral to ourselves at DBS. And we talk about why it's important for you as an organisation that when someone has left you or you've removed them from regulated activity for a safeguarding reason, you let us at the DBS know. And this is where we look at the risk of future harm to other groups. Just because someone's left your employment, you might go, brilliant, problem solved, they're not going to commit any more harm for me. But we need to think about, yes, but they might go on to other groups and commit further harm to vulnerable groups. So please come along. It's really, really important for your safeguarding procedures.
Thanks for that. And Erin's put in the chat how people can register for that next webinar on the 8th of November. So we've just got a couple of minutes. Is there any burning questions before we finish? As I say, I mean, I found it fascinating, but there's also so much to take in that I actually need to read the slides again, because there's an awful lot of information there, and it's about then applying it, isn't it, Cathy?
Yeah.
So I think it is something that isn't as straightforward as I'd like, but I understand the complexity, and it's getting your head around that complexity, I think, and taking time.
Yeah, today was a whistle-stop tour of DBS, and we do have your regional outreach workers in each of your regions that you can contact with any questions and queries, and they'd be more than happy to give you any help or support.
That's really helpful. Well, as there aren't any more questions, I think I'll draw this webinar to a close and just say a huge thank you to Cathy for her time today, for a very informative and helpful webinar.